Louis XII of France was born on June 27, 1462 at the Château de Blois. He was the only son of Charles, Duc d'Orléans, and his wife Mary of Cleves. Furthermore, he was the great-grandson of King Charles V and grandson of Charles's younger son, the Duke Louis I of Orléans, who was the younger brother of King Charles VI, and who was assassinated in 1407 by the Duke of Burgundy, John the Fearless. Louis was also a grandchild of Valentina of Visconti, who held a hereditary claim to the Duchy of Milan, which was usurped in 1450 by Francesco I Sforza. Before we continue with this video, I'd like to express my gratitude to Christine Miller for her generous contribution to my channel via Super Thanks. Louis's father died when the boy was 2 years old, after which he was placed under the guardianship of King Louis XI of France. The king was not very fond of the young boy and offered him a poor education. In 1476, the king arranged a marriage between Louis and his daughter Jeanne of France. Jeanne was physically quite unwell, and it was presumed that she would be unable to produce any offspring which suited the king, as Louis XI hoped to cause the extinction of the Valois-Orléans bloodline, which in his eyes posed a direct threat to the elder branch of the Valois bloodline. Louis XI died on August 13, 1483, and was succeeded by his 13-year-old son, the new king Charles VIII of France. Upon Charles' accession to the throne, a fierce dispute immediately broke out between his sister Anne of Beaujeu and Louis d'Orléans over the guardianship and regency of the young king. After the decision of the Estates Générales Assembly of 1484, Charles was finally placed under the guardianship of his sister Anne, who was 10 years his senior, and her husband Pierre II de Bourbon until 1491. During this period, the affairs of state were essentially handled by the future Cardinal Guillaume Briçonnet. In 1484, dissatisfied with the regency of Anne of Beaujeu, Louis took part in the so-called Mad War, which was a late medieval conflict between a coalition of feudal lords and the French monarchy. Louis was captured and imprisoned during the Battle of Saint-Aubin-du-Cormier in July 1488. Pardoned after 3 years in prison, he followed his cousin King Charles VIII to Italy to fight in the First Italian War. Because his grandmother was the daughter of the first Duke of Milan, Gian Galeazzo of Visconti, Louis considered himself to have a claim to the Duchy of Milan and aimed to conquer it. He was, however, quickly defeated. In April of 1498, Charles VIII of France died unexpectedly after suffering from cranial trauma after he struck his head on the lintel of a door. Because Charles left no living offspring, and he was the last of the elder branch of the House of Valois, the crown passed on to Louis. Immediately after his accession to the throne, Louis had his union to Jeanne of France declared null and void by Pope Alexander VI for reason of non-consummation. Although Louis's case was extremely weak, as Jeanne could produce witnesses to Louis boasting about his sexual performances with Jeanne, the Pope was obligated for political reasons to grant Louis the annulment. Jeanne stepped aside, was made Duchess of Berry, and retired to a convent in Bourges. After the annulment of his marriage to Jeanne, Louis XII went on to marry the widow of the previous king, Anne of Brittany, on January 8, 1499. Anne was bound by her old marriage contract. If no Dauphin survived, she was to marry the heir to the throne. Politically, Anne's marriage to the King of France was important because it tied the Duchy of Brittany to the crown of France. Their union produced 5 children, 2 of whom reached adulthood. Those 2 are Claude of France, who would become Queen of France through her marriage to François I, and Renée of France, who would become the Duchess of Ferrara through her marriage to Ercole II d'Este. As Louis felt he couldn't let go of his claim on the Duchy of Milan, he led France back into several wars in Italy. In 1499, he conquered Milan during the Italian War of 1499 until 1504. Then, together with Ferdinand II of Aragon, he occupied the Kingdom of Naples. On September 22, 1504, Louis signed the Treaty of Blois, which arranged the marriage of his daughter Claude of France to the future Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, and that of his niece Germaine de Foix to Ferdinand II of Aragon, after which the king handed over his rights over the Kingdom of Naples to Germaine. But at the request of the Estates Générales of Tours in 1506, his daughter Claude was eventually engaged to François d'Angoulême, who would become the future François I of France. It was also during these Estates Générales that Louis was officially named Father of the People. This title was granted to him because of the internal order in which he had maintained the kingdom, the reduction of the size of taxes by a quarter of its amount, and the reform of justice accomplished between 1499 and 1501. Although the Italian wars seem to have come to an end, hostilities flared up again due to the ambitions of Pope Julius II, who wanted to conquer all of Italy and annex it to his papal state. To this end, he first wanted to expel all foreigners from Italy, and primarily the French. This led to the War of the League of Cambrai. During the Battle of Novara in 1513, the French cavalry was forced to flee the battlefield, consequently forcing France to withdraw entirely from Italy. Louis's wife, Anne of Brittany, died in 1514. In order to seal the good relationship that existed between England and France, Louis married Mary Tudor, the sister of King Henry VIII of England. At the time of the marriage, the tall, slender, and grey-eyed Mary was only 18 years old. Louis was 52. Despite Louis's 2 previous marriages, the king had no living sons, and with this wedding he intended to conceive an heir to his throne, and also, perhaps, to establish a future claim to the English throne for his descendants. His plans came to nothing, however. The couple had no children, as the marriage lasted barely 3 months. Louis XII of France died in Paris on January 1, 1515, supposedly from his exertions in the bedchamber. He was succeeded on the throne by his son-in-law and second cousin François I, who was by now married to his daughter Claude of France. Mary Tudor returned to England, where she went on to marry Charles Brandon, 1st Duke of Suffolk. Louis XII was buried in the Basilique de Saint-Denis. Like many other French kings, his tomb was looted during the French Revolution, and his remains were buried in a mass grave outside of the church. As always, thank you for watching.